My name is Alina, and I'm 72 years old. I live in a quiet little town in Maine, in the same house I raised my daughter, Carol, in. Life was simple, predictable, and for the most part happy. I spent my days tending to my garden, volunteering at the local library, and enjoying the company of my small circle of friends. My greatest joy, of course, was Carol. I poured my heart and soul into raising her, and watching her grow into a successful, independent woman filled me with pride. She moved to California after college, chasing her dreams, and eventually married a man named David. David was, on the surface, charming and ambitious. He had a good job in finance, and they lived in a beautiful house in a gated community. Everything seemed perfect, but something always felt off about him. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was a coldness in his eyes that made me uneasy. Visits from Carol became less frequent over the years, and when she did come home, she seemed different, almost distant. She would talk about her life in California, the fancy parties, and her husband's achievements, but she never seemed truly happy. Still, I tried to be supportive, telling myself that she was just busy and that I was simply an overprotective mother. Everything changed after my husband, Tom, passed away. We had been married for 45 years, and his absence left a gaping hole in my life. I was lonely and struggled to manage the house and finances on my own. Carol and David came for the funeral, and that's when they suggested I move to California to be closer to them. At first, I was hesitant. I had lived in Maine my entire life, and the thought of leaving my home and friends was daunting. But Carol was persuasive, promising me companionship, support, and a better quality of life. David, surprisingly, echoed her sentiments, assuring me that they had plenty of room and that they would love to have me. I wanted to be closer to my daughter, and the idea of not having to worry about maintaining the house was appealing. So, I made the difficult decision to sell my home and move to California. I arrived in California with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Carol and David's house was even more extravagant than I had imagined, a sprawling mansion with a perfectly manicured lawn and a swimming pool. I was given a small room in the back of the house, which was nice enough, but it felt isolated from the rest of the family. Initially, things seemed promising. Carol took me shopping, showed me around town, and introduced me to some of her friends. David was polite, if somewhat aloof, and I tried to make an effort to get to know him better. But as time went on, their behavior towards me began to change. Carol became increasingly impatient and dismissive, often cutting me off mid-sentence or rolling her eyes at my opinions. David was even worse, making snide remarks about my age, my outdated views, and my inability to keep up with their fast-paced lifestyle. It was as if I had become an unwelcome burden, a reminder of their past that they were eager to forget. I tried to talk to Carol about it, but she brushed off my concerns, accusing me of being overly sensitive and demanding. She said I needed to adjust to their way of life and stop clinging to the past. My heart ached. This wasn't the loving, supportive family I had envisioned. I felt like a stranger in my own daughter's house, tolerated but not wanted. I began to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake. Was this new life worth the constant feeling of being unwanted and disrespected? The loneliness I felt was even more profound than it had been in Maine, because now it was compounded by the realization that my own daughter and her husband didn't truly care about me. I tried to find solace in my hobbies, but it was hard to focus when I felt so miserable. The garden I attempted to cultivate in a small corner of their yard was a constant reminder of the vibrant one I had left behind. I felt trapped with no way out, and I started to realize that moving to California might have been the worst decision of my life. But what could I do? I had sold my house, given away most of my belongings, and uprooted my entire life. Was I destined to live out my days feeling like an unwanted guest in my own daughter's home? The turning point came during Carol's birthday party. She was turning 40, and she and David threw a lavish celebration at their house, inviting all their wealthy friends and colleagues. I tried to make myself useful, helping with the preparations and offering to assist the caterers. But every time I tried to contribute, I was met with condescending remarks and thinly veiled insults. David told me to stay out of the way, saying I was making things more complicated. Carol snapped at me for not dressing appropriately, telling me my clothes were outdated and embarrassing. As the party got underway, I retreated to my room, feeling hurt and humiliated. I could hear the laughter and music from downstairs, but I felt a million miles away. Later that evening, as the party was winding down, I overheard Carol and David talking in the hallway outside my room. They didn't know I was there, and what I heard shattered my heart into a million pieces. "I can't believe she actually thought those flowers were an appropriate gift," Carol said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Honestly, Mom has no sense of style. She's so out of touch." David chuckled. "Well, what do you expect? She's ancient. I swear she's getting more senile every day. We need to start thinking about what to do with her. This whole living arrangement isn't working. She's cramping our style." Carol sighed. "I know, but what can we do? We can't just kick her out. It would look terrible." "We'll figure something out," David said. "Maybe we can convince her to move into a retirement home, or even better, a nursing home, somewhere far away where she won't bother us." I stood there, frozen in disbelief. My own daughter and son-in-law were plotting to get rid of me, to ship me off to some lonely institution where they wouldn't have to see me or think about me. The pain was unbearable, a sharp, agonizing stab to the heart. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the full extent of their cruelty and selfishness. They didn't care about me, not really. They saw me as an inconvenience, an obstacle to their perfect lives. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The years of hurt, the constant disrespect, the feeling of being unwanted, it all coalesced into a burning rage. I realized I couldn't continue living like this, being a doormat for their contempt. I had to do something, not just for myself, but for all the elderly people who are mistreated and forgotten by their families. But what could I do? I was an old woman, with limited resources and no one to turn to. How could I possibly fight back against their wealth and power? The seed of revenge had been planted, and I knew I wouldn't rest until I had found a way to make them pay for their cruelty. The thought of spending my remaining years in a nursing home, forgotten and alone, fueled my determination. I would show them that I was not someone to be trifled with, that even an old woman could have the strength and cunning to take revenge. I just needed to find the right opportunity, the perfect plan to turn the tables on them. And as I lay in bed that night, the first tendrils of a strategy began to form in my mind. It would be slow, methodical, and subtle, but it would be devastating. They had underestimated me for far too long, and they were about to learn a very painful lesson. How could I possibly get my revenge, though, without any resources? The next morning, I woke up with a newfound sense of purpose. The anger and hurt were still there, but they were now tempered with a steely determination. I knew I couldn't confront Carol and David directly. They would just dismiss me, or worse, try to manipulate me into believing I had misunderstood them. Instead, I decided to play the part of the docile, compliant old woman, all the while secretly plotting my revenge. I started by being extra helpful around the house, offering to cook, clean, and run errands. I complimented Carol on her clothes and her accomplishments, and I made an effort to engage David in conversations about his work. They seemed pleased with my change in attitude, mistaking it for acceptance and resignation. "See, Mom, I told you things would get better if you just tried to fit in," Carol said one day, patting my hand condescendingly. "You're finally starting to understand how things work around here." I smiled sweetly and nodded, inwardly seething. Little did they know I was carefully observing their habits, their routines, and their vulnerabilities. I paid close attention to their conversations, gleaning information about their finances, their business dealings, and their personal lives. I learned that David was heavily invested in a risky real estate venture, and that he was under immense pressure to deliver results. I also discovered that Carol was secretly unhappy in her marriage, and that she harbored resentment towards David for his controlling behavior. The more I learned, the more confident I became that I could find a way to exploit their weaknesses and turn them against each other. My first act of sabotage was subtle but effective. I started accidentally misplacing things, David's keys, Carol's favorite jewelry, important documents. At first, they dismissed it as my forgetfulness, but as the incidents became more frequent, they started to get irritated. They would argue and bicker, accusing each other of being careless and disorganized. I watched with satisfaction as their perfect facade began to crack, revealing the underlying tensions in their relationship. Next, I turned my attention to their social circle. I made an effort to befriend their friends and acquaintances, showering them with compliments and feigning interest in their lives. I subtly steered the conversations towards Carol and David, making veiled references to their marital problems and David's questionable business practices. I knew that gossip traveled quickly in their circles, and I wanted to plant seeds of doubt and suspicion in their minds. Slowly but surely, their friends started to distance themselves, avoiding their parties and declining their invitations. Carol and David noticed the change, and they became increasingly paranoid, suspecting each other of sabotaging their social standing. "Why is everyone avoiding us?" Carol demanded one evening, glaring at David. "Is it something you said, or did you do something to embarrass me?" David retorted. "Don't look at me. You're the one who's always gossiping about people behind their backs." Maybe they're finally tired of your petty dramas. Their arguments became more frequent and more intense, escalating into shouting matches that echoed through the house. I would sit in my room, listening to their fights with a sense of grim satisfaction. My plan was working. I was slowly but surely driving them apart, poisoning their relationship from the inside out. But I knew I couldn't stop there. I needed to strike a more decisive blow, something that would truly devastate them and leave them with nothing. I needed to find a way to attack their finances, their reputation, and their carefully constructed image of success. The opportunity presented itself unexpectedly during a charity gala that Carol and David were hosting at their house. It was a prestigious event, attended by the city's elite, and they had spared no expense to make it a success. As I watched them fussing over the decorations and catering, I realized that this was my chance to inflict maximum damage. But how could I possibly ruin such a high-profile event without being detected? I spent the next few days meticulously planning my attack. I knew I couldn't do anything that would directly implicate me, so I had to be subtle and cunning. I started by tampering with the catering. I knew that Carol had hired a renowned chef to prepare a gourmet meal for the guests, so I decided to target the ingredients. Under the guise of helping out in the kitchen, I subtly added excessive amounts of salt and pepper to the sauces and dressings, knowing that it would ruin the taste and make the food unpalatable. I also replaced the expensive champagne with a cheap sparkling wine, hoping that the guests wouldn't notice the difference until it was too late. Next, I turned my attention to the decorations. I knew that Carol had spent a fortune on flowers and lighting, so I decided to sabotage them in a way that would be both embarrassing and disruptive. I loosened the screws on the chandeliers, hoping that they would fall down during the party, and I subtly rearranged the flower arrangements, replacing the elegant blooms with cheap, artificial ones. My final act of sabotage was the most daring. I knew that David was planning to make a speech at the gala to impress his colleagues and potential investors. So I decided to tamper with his notes, replacing the flattering anecdotes with embarrassing stories from his past and inserting inflammatory remarks about his business rivals. I knew that if he read the speech as written, it would be a complete disaster, ruining his reputation and potentially jeopardizing his career. On the night of the gala, I dressed in my finest clothes and put on my best smile, pretending to be a gracious and supportive mother-in-law. As the guests arrived, I greeted them warmly, offering them drinks and making small talk. I watched with amusement as they sampled the food, grimaced at the taste, and discreetly spat it into their napkins. I overheard them whispering to each other about the cheap champagne and the tacky decorations, and I felt a surge of satisfaction. My plan was working perfectly. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere in the room began to sour. The guests became restless and irritable, and Carol and David grew increasingly anxious and flustered. They tried to salvage the situation, but every attempt seemed to backfire. The chandeliers flickered ominously, threatening to fall at any moment, and the artificial flowers looked even more garish under the bright lights. Finally, it was time for David to make his speech. He stepped up to the podium, cleared his throat, and began to read from the notes I had tampered with. At first, he seemed confident and composed, but as he progressed through the speech, his expression turned to one of confusion and horror. He stumbled over the words, his voice faltering as he realized the true nature of the text. The guests in the audience shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances and whispering to each other. Some of them started to laugh, while others looked on with disapproval. Carol watched from the sidelines, her face turning red with anger and embarrassment. She knew that David's speech was a disaster, and that it would have serious consequences for their reputation and their future. As David finished his speech, the room erupted in chaos. The guests started to argue and complain, demanding refunds and threatening to leave. Carol confronted David, accusing him of deliberately sabotaging the event. He denied the accusations, blaming the caterers, the decorators, and everyone else involved. Their argument escalated into a full-blown shouting match, with both of them hurling insults and accusations at each other. I watched with detached amusement as their perfect world crumbled around them. My revenge was complete. But as I stood there, basking in their misery, a strange feeling came over me. It wasn't satisfaction or triumph or even relief. It was emptiness. I had spent months plotting my revenge, consumed by anger and resentment. But now that I had achieved my goal, I felt nothing but a hollow sense of loss. What had I accomplished? Had I really made myself feel better by ruining their lives? Or had I simply sunk to their level, becoming as cruel and selfish as they were? The questions swirled in my mind, leaving me feeling confused and uncertain. I realized that revenge, no matter how justified, was never truly satisfying. It was a destructive force that consumed everything in its path, leaving only emptiness and regret. As I turned to leave the party, I caught Carol's eye. She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and despair, her face streaked with tears. In that moment, I saw a glimpse of the woman she used to be, the loving, caring daughter I had raised. And I knew that I had gone too far. I had allowed my anger to consume me, blinding me to the consequences of my actions. I had hurt my own daughter, and I had destroyed whatever chance we had of reconciliation. I realized that I needed to make amends, to find a way to repair the damage I had caused. But how could I possibly undo the harm I had inflicted? Was it too late to salvage our relationship? Was there any hope of forgiveness? The next morning, I woke up feeling remorseful and ashamed. The satisfaction I had felt the night before had evaporated, replaced by a deep sense of regret. I knew I had to do something to make amends, but I didn't know where to start. I decided to begin by apologizing to Carol. I found her in the kitchen, looking tired and distraught. She was sitting at the table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. "Carol," I said softly, "can we talk?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with anger and resentment. "What do you want?" she snapped. "To gloat, to tell me how clever you were to ruin my party?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "I want to apologize. I was wrong. I let my anger get the better of me, and I did things I shouldn't have done," she scoffed. "An apology? Is that supposed to make everything better? You've destroyed my reputation, alienated my friends, and ruined my marriage. How can an apology possibly fix that?" "I know it can't," I said, "but it's a start. I understand that I've hurt you deeply, and I'm truly sorry for that. I never meant to cause you so much pain." Carol stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, she started to cry. "Why, Mom?" she sobbed. "Why did you do this to me? I thought you loved me." "I do love you," I said, tears welling up in my own eyes. But I was hurt and angry, and I didn't know how to deal with those feelings. I let them consume me, and I ended up hurting the people I cared about the most. We sat in silence for a while, both of us crying. Then Carol spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not sure I can forgive you," she said. "But I'm willing to try. I miss you, Mom. I miss the way things used to be." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I miss it too," I said. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn your forgiveness and rebuild our relationship." We spent the rest of the day talking, sharing our feelings and trying to understand each other's perspectives. It was a difficult and painful process, but it was also cathartic. We both admitted our mistakes and acknowledged the hurt we had caused each other. By the end of the day, we had made some progress towards reconciliation. We weren't back to where we used to be, but we were on the right track. The next step was to address the damage I had caused to Carol and David's reputation. I decided to write a letter to the local newspaper, taking full responsibility for the events at the gala and explaining my motivations. I didn't try to excuse my behavior, but I did offer a sincere apology to Carol and David, and to all the guests who had been affected by my actions. I knew that the letter wouldn't undo all the harm I had caused, but I hoped it would at least mitigate some of the damage. To my surprise, the letter was well received. Many people praised me for my honesty and courage, and some even expressed sympathy for my situation. Carol and David were initially furious, accusing me of trying to garner attention and manipulate public opinion. But as they saw the positive response to the letter, they started to soften their stance. They realized that I was genuinely remorseful and that I was trying to make amends for my mistakes. In the weeks that followed, Carol and I worked hard to rebuild our relationship. We spent time together, talking, laughing, and sharing our lives. We went to therapy, both individually and as a couple, to address our underlying issues and learn healthier ways of communicating. Slowly but surely, our relationship began to heal. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but we persevered. And eventually, we reached a point where we could honestly say that we had forgiven each other. As for David, the situation was more complicated. He was still angry and resentful, and he struggled to forgive me for what I had done. But he also recognized that I had been wronged, and that he and Carol had contributed to the situation. After much soul-searching, he agreed to attend therapy with Carol and me. It was a long and arduous process, but eventually, we were able to reach a place of understanding and acceptance. David never fully forgave me, but he did acknowledge my remorse and my efforts to make amends. And he agreed to move forward for the sake of his marriage and his family. In the end, my quest for revenge had led me down a dark and destructive path, but it had also taught me valuable lessons about forgiveness, reconciliation, and the importance of family. I had learned that revenge is never the answer, and that true satisfaction comes from healing and rebuilding relationships. I realized that while revenge might seem appealing in the heat of the moment, it ultimately leaves everyone involved feeling empty and unfulfilled. A few months later, Carol and David decided to move back to Maine. They realized that their fast-paced, materialistic lifestyle in California was not making them happy, and they wanted to raise their future family in a more supportive and nurturing environment. They bought a house near mine, and we became closer than ever before. I helped them with the renovations, offering my advice and expertise. We spent weekends together, exploring the local area and enjoying the simple pleasures of life. I watched with joy as Carol's pregnancy progressed, and I eagerly anticipated the arrival of my first grandchild. When my grandson, Thomas, was born, I was overjoyed. He was a beautiful, healthy baby, and he brought so much happiness into our lives. I spent hours holding him, rocking him, and singing him lullabies. I watched him grow and develop, marveling at his curiosity and his infectious laughter. He became the center of my world, and he filled the void in my heart that had been left by my husband's death. As I held Thomas in my arms, I realized that I had finally found true happiness. I had learned from my mistakes, forgiven my enemies, and rebuilt my relationships. I had found peace and contentment in my life, surrounded by the love of my family. And I knew that I would never again succumb to the destructive forces of anger and revenge. One sunny afternoon, as I was sitting on my porch watching Thomas play in the yard, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, wondering who it could be. Then I answered the phone. "Hello," I said. A voice on the other end of the line said, "Eleanor, this is Martha. Do you remember me?" Martha. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. "Martha," I said, "I'm sorry, but I don't think I remember you." "We worked together at the library years ago," she said, "before you moved to California." As soon as she said that, the memories came flooding back. Martha was a kind, gentle woman who had been my closest friend at the library. We had shared countless conversations, lunches, and laughs, but we had lost touch after I moved to California, and I hadn't thought about her in years. "Martha, it's so good to hear from you," I said. "How have you been?" "I've been fine," she said. "I have some news that I thought you should know." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" I asked. "I heard from a mutual friend that Carol and David moved back to Maine," she said, "and that they're living near you." "That's right," I said. "They're doing great. We're all very happy." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Martha said, "I'm glad to hear that, but I also heard something else, something about a charity gala and a letter to the newspaper." My stomach churned. How much did she know? "Yes," I said, "there was a bit of a misunderstanding, but it's all water under the bridge now." "Eleanor," Martha said, her voice serious, "I know what happened. I know about the revenge plot and the sabotaged party and the letter to the editor." My face flushed with shame. "How did you find out?" I asked. "It doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is that I know the truth, and I'm here to tell you that you're not alone." I was stunned. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean that I understand why you did what you did," she said. "Carol and David treated you horribly, and they deserve to be punished. You were just standing up for yourself." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "But revenge is wrong," I said. "It's destructive and harmful. I regret what I did." "I know you do," Martha said. "But that doesn't mean you were wrong to feel angry and hurt. You were justified in wanting to make them pay for their actions." "But I caused so much pain," I said. "I hurt my own daughter. How can that be justified?" "Sometimes you have to hurt people in order to teach them a lesson," Martha said. "Carol and David needed to learn that they couldn't treat you like that, and you taught them that lesson in a way that they'll never forget." I was silent for a moment, trying to process what Martha was saying. Was it possible that I had been right all along? Was revenge sometimes justified? I don't know, I said finally. I'm still not sure I agree with you. But I appreciate your support. It means a lot to me. Of course, Martha said. I'm always here for you, Alina. You're a strong, courageous woman and you deserve to be happy. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. We talked for a few more minutes, catching up on old times and sharing our life experiences. Then we said goodbye, promising to stay in touch. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, validation, and a lingering sense of guilt. Martha's words had comforted me, but they had also challenged my beliefs. Was revenge always wrong? Or were there circumstances in which it could be justified? I knew that I would never have a definitive answer to that question. But I also knew that I had learned a valuable lesson from my experiences. Revenge might provide temporary satisfaction, but it ultimately leads to more pain and suffering. The true path to happiness lies in forgiveness, reconciliation, and love. As I watched Thomas playing in the yard, I smiled. I had made mistakes, but I had also learned from them. And I was grateful for the opportunity to start over, to rebuild my relationships, and to create a better future for myself and my family. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the landscape. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh, clean air. I was home, and I was finally at peace. As I watched my grandson playing, I couldn't help but wonder, had I truly escaped the cycle of revenge, or would it come back to haunt me and my family in unexpected ways? Only time would tell if the seeds of resentment, once sown, could ever be fully eradicated, or if they would lie dormant, waiting for the right conditions to sprout once more. For now, though, I chose to focus on the present, on the joy of watching my grandson grow, and on the love that surrounded me. I had learned a hard lesson about the dangers of revenge, and I was determined to live my life with compassion, forgiveness, and gratitude. The call from Martha, though unsettling at first, had ultimately served as a reminder of my own strength and resilience. It had also reaffirmed the importance of having supportive friends in my life, people who would stand by me, even when I made mistakes. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I continued to heal and grow. I volunteered at the library again, rekindling old friendships and making new ones. I spent more time with Carol and David, helping them with Thomas and sharing in their joys and challenges. I even started a small garden, tending to the flowers and vegetables with the same care and attention I had given to my garden in Maine. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. I had found peace and contentment in my surroundings, and I was grateful for every moment. One evening, as I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset, Carol came over to visit. She sat down beside me and we talked about our day. As we were talking, she suddenly turned to me and said, "Mom, I've been thinking." "About what?" I asked. "About what happened in California," she said. "About the revenge plot and the sabotaged party and everything else." My heart skipped a beat. "What about it?" I asked cautiously. "I've realized something," she said. "I realized that you were right. I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I was selfish and insensitive, and I didn't appreciate you enough." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Oh, Carol," I said, "you don't have to say that." "Yes, I do," she said. "I want you to know that I understand why you did what you did, and I forgive you. I truly forgive you." I threw my arms around her, hugging her tightly. "Thank you," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for understanding." We sat there for a long time, holding each other, crying and laughing. It was a moment of profound healing and reconciliation. In that moment, I knew that I had truly escaped the cycle of revenge. I had forgiven those who had wronged me, and I had been forgiven in return. I had found peace and happiness in my life, surrounded by the love of my family, and I was grateful for every moment. As the sun finally set, casting a golden glow over the landscape, I smiled. Life was good. And I was ready to embrace whatever the future held, with an open heart and a forgiving spirit. The whispers of the past might still linger, but they no longer held the power to define me. I had learned from my mistakes, and I was determined to live my life with compassion, grace, and love. The end, or perhaps just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with the promise of hope, healing, and the enduring power of forgiveness. But my peace was soon to be tested. A letter arrived a few weeks later, bearing a return address I didn't recognize. The handwriting was spidery and unfamiliar, and the postmark was from a town I'd never heard of. Curiosity piqued. I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The words were typed, not handwritten, and they were chilling. "Alina, we know what you did to Carol and David. We know about the ruined party, the public humiliation, and the years of manipulation. You think you've gotten away with it, but you haven't. Justice is coming. A wave of fear washed over me. Who had sent this letter? And how did they know so much about what had happened in California? The letter was unsigned, offering no clue as to the sender's identity. I reread the words, trying to decipher their meaning, but they remained cryptic and menacing. Was this some kind of prank? Or was it a genuine threat? I decided to show the letter to Carol and David. They were both shocked and disturbed by its contents. "This is insane," David said, his face pale. "Who would do something like this?" "I don't know," I said, my voice trembling. "But it's obviously someone who knows a lot about our past." Carol suggested we go to the police, but I hesitated. I didn't want to dredge up the past again, and I was afraid that the police investigation would only make things worse. "Let's just ignore it," I said. "Maybe it's just a crank letter. If we don't give it any attention, maybe it will go away." David was skeptical, but he agreed to my suggestion. We decided to keep the letter a secret from Thomas, not wanting to frighten him. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I kept looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was being watched. I started having nightmares, reliving the events of the past and fearing what the future might hold. The peace and contentment I had found in Maine began to erode, replaced by a growing sense of paranoia. One morning, I woke up to find my garden vandalized. The flowers were trampled, the vegetables were uprooted, and a single word was spray-painted on the fence. "Guilty!" I gasped in horror. This was no longer a prank. Someone was deliberately targeting me, trying to intimidate me. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to find out who was behind these threats, and I had to stop them before they did something even worse. But how? I was an old woman, with limited resources and no investigative skills. How could I possibly track down a mysterious enemy who seemed to know everything about me? As I stood there, surveying the damage to my garden, a glimmer of determination sparked within me. I might be old, but I wasn't helpless. I had survived worse things in my life, and I wasn't about to let some anonymous coward terrorize me. I would fight back, using whatever resources I had available. But where should I begin? What was the next move in this deadly game of cat and mouse? I decided to start by doing some research. I spent hours online, searching for information about the town where the letter had been postmarked. It was a small, isolated community in northern Maine, with a history of economic hardship and social unrest. I also searched for information about anyone who might have a grudge against me or my family. I looked into former business associates of David's, disgruntled employees of Carol's, and even old acquaintances from my past. But I found nothing that seemed relevant. The letter writer remained a complete mystery. Frustrated, I decided to try a different approach. I contacted Martha, my old friend from the library, and asked her for help. I explained the situation, telling her about the threatening letter and the vandalism. Martha was shocked and concerned, and she immediately offered to assist me in any way she could. "I have some connections in northern Maine," she said. "I can ask around and see if anyone knows anything about this town and its residents." I was grateful for her help, and I eagerly awaited her findings. In the meantime, I decided to take some precautions to protect myself and my family. I installed a security system in my house, and I asked my neighbors to keep an eye out for any suspicious activity. I also started carrying a small can of pepper spray with me whenever I went out, just in case. I knew that these measures wouldn't guarantee my safety, but they made me feel a little more secure. A few days later, Martha called me with some news. "I've learned something about that town," she said. "It's a close-knit community, and they don't take kindly to outsiders. There's a history of feuds and vendettas, and people tend to hold grudges for a long time." She also told me that there was a family in the town with a long-standing reputation for violence and intimidation. The family's name was Blackwood, and they were known for their ruthless and vengeful behavior. I felt a chill run down my spine. Could the Blackwood family be behind the threats? It seemed like a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. I asked Martha to find out more about the Blackwoods and their possible connection to me or my family. She agreed to do some more digging, and I waited anxiously for her next update. As I waited, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The Blackwood family sounded like a formidable enemy, and I wondered if I was in over my head. But I knew I couldn't back down. I had to protect myself and my family, no matter the cost. I began to think about the best way to confront the Blackwoods if they were indeed behind the threats. Should I go to the police? Should I try to negotiate with them? Or should I take matters into my own hands? The last option was the most tempting, but it was also the most dangerous. I knew that if I resorted to violence, I would be crossing a line that I could never uncross. But I was also determined to protect my family, even if it meant risking my own life. As I wrestled with these difficult questions, I received another letter. This one was different from the first. It was handwritten, not typed, and it was filled with rage and hatred. "Eleanor, you ruined our lives," the letter said. "You destroyed our family, now it's time for you to pay." The letter was signed with a single name. Sarah Blackwood. Sarah Blackwood. The name sent a shiver down my spine. I knew that I was about to face the greatest challenge of my life. But what had I done to this Sarah Blackwood to earn such hatred? I racked my brain, trying to recall any connection I might have to the Blackwood family. The name was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. I called Carol and David, asking if they knew anyone named Sarah Blackwood. They both said no. Frustrated, I decided to consult my old journals. I had kept a detailed record of my life for many years, and I hoped that I might find some clue in those pages. I spent hours poring over my journals, reading about my childhood, my marriage, my career, and my family. Finally, I stumbled upon an entry that made my heart skip a beat. It was a passage about a difficult business deal that my husband, Tom, had been involved in many years ago. Tom had been a successful real estate developer, and he had often faced stiff competition from other developers. In this particular case, Tom had outbid another developer for a valuable piece of land. The other developer was a man named Caleb Blackwood. Caleb Blackwood. The name rang a bell. I remembered Tom telling me that Caleb Blackwood had been furious about losing the deal and that he had threatened to get revenge. But Tom had dismissed the threats, and I had forgotten about them. Could Sarah Blackwood be related to Caleb Blackwood? It seemed increasingly likely. I searched online for information about Caleb Blackwood and his family. I discovered that he had died several years ago, leaving behind a wife and 2 children, a son and a daughter. The daughter's name was Sarah. Sarah Blackwood. It all started to make sense. Sarah Blackwood was seeking revenge for her father's loss. She believed that my husband, Tom, had wronged her family, and she was determined to make me pay for his actions. I felt a surge of anger and resentment. It wasn't fair. I had nothing to do with Tom's business dealings. Why was I being targeted for something that had happened so long ago? But I also realized that Sarah Blackwood was consumed by grief and rage, and that she wouldn't be swayed by reason or logic. I had to find a way to stop her before she did something even more drastic. I decided to confront her directly. I knew it was a risky move, but I felt that it was the only way to resolve the situation. I used the internet to track down Sarah Blackwood's address. It was a remote cabin in the woods, several miles outside of town. I wrote her a letter, asking if we could meet to discuss our differences. I didn't reveal that I knew about her connection to Caleb Blackwood, or that I was aware of her threats. I simply stated that I wanted to understand why she was targeting me, and that I was willing to listen to her grievances. I mailed the letter and waited anxiously for her response. Days turned into weeks, but I heard nothing from Sarah Blackwood. I began to wonder if she had even received my letter. Maybe she was planning to attack me without warning. Or maybe she had simply decided to drop her vendetta. I tried to convince myself that the latter was true, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I knew that Sarah Blackwood was still out there, plotting her revenge. And I knew that I had to be prepared for anything. But what was she planning, and when would she strike? One afternoon, as I was tending to my garden, I noticed a car parked down the road. It was a dark, beat-up sedan, and it looked out of place in my quiet neighborhood. I watched as a woman got out of the car and started walking towards my house. She was tall and thin, with long, dark hair and piercing blue eyes. She had a stern, determined look on her face. As she got closer, I recognized her. It was Sarah Blackwood. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. The moment of reckoning had arrived. I stood up, bracing myself for whatever was about to happen. Sarah Blackwood stopped in front of my garden, her eyes fixed on me. "Eleanor," she said, her voice cold and hard. "We need to talk." "I've been expecting you," I said, trying to sound calm. "I received your letter. I'm willing to listen to what you have to say." Sarah Blackwood nodded. "Good," she said, "because I have a lot to say." She paused, taking a deep breath. "My father was a good man," she said. "He worked hard his entire life and he built a successful business. But your husband, Tom, ruined him. He stole his land, he destroyed his reputation, and he drove him to an early grave." I felt a pang of guilt. I knew that Tom's business dealings had sometimes been ruthless, but I had never realized the extent of the damage he had caused. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't know," Sarah Blackwood scoffed. "Sorry, is that all you have to say? My father lost everything because of your husband. He died a broken man, and my family has suffered ever since." "I understand your pain," I said. "But I had nothing to do with what happened. Why are you targeting me?" "Because you're his wife," she said. "You're the one who benefited from his actions. You lived in a big house, you drove a fancy car, and you enjoyed a comfortable life, all while my family was struggling to survive." "That's not fair," I said. "I worked hard for everything I have, and I never wanted to hurt anyone." "I don't care," she said. "You're guilty by association. You're going to pay for what your husband did." I realized that I couldn't reason with her. She was too consumed by anger and resentment. I had to find a way to defend myself. "What do you want?" I asked. "What will it take to make you stop?" Sarah Blackwood smiled, a chilling smile that sent shivers down my spine. "I want what's rightfully mine," she said. "I want the land that your husband stole from my father. I want the money that he made from it, and I want you to suffer the same way my family has suffered." "That's impossible," I said. "I don't have that kind of money, and I can't just give you the land. It belongs to my daughter now." "Then you'll have to find a way," she said. "Because if you don't, I'm going to make your life a living hell. I'm going to destroy everything you care about, and I'm going to make you regret the day you ever met Tom." She turned and walked back to her car, leaving me standing alone in my garden, trembling with fear. I knew that Sarah Blackwood was serious. She was determined to get her revenge, no matter the cost, and I knew that I had to do everything in my power to stop her. But how could I possibly satisfy her demands? I didn't have the resources to give her what she wanted, and I didn't want to put my daughter and grandson in danger. I was trapped between a rock and a hard place with no easy way out. As I stood there, feeling helpless and desperate, an idea began to form in my mind. It was a risky idea, but it might be the only way to save my family. I decided to play Sarah Blackwood at her own game. I would feign weakness and submission, all the while secretly plotting my revenge. I would lure her into a trap, and I would make her pay for threatening my family. But how could I possibly outsmart someone as ruthless and cunning as Sarah Blackwood? I spent the next few days pretending to be intimidated by Sarah Blackwood. I avoided going out in public, and I kept my doors and windows locked at all times. I even started carrying a gun with me just in case. I wanted Sarah Blackwood to think that she had me on the run, that she was winning. I knew that she was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake, and I was determined to give her exactly what she wanted. One evening, I received a phone call from Sarah Blackwood. "I've been watching you, Alina," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "I can see that you're scared. Good. You should be. What do you want?" I asked, trying to sound frightened. "I want you to meet me," she said. "I want you to bring me the deed to the land that your husband stole from my father, and I want you to bring me $1 million in cash." "I can't do that," I said. "I don't have that kind of money, and I can't just give you the land." "Then you're going to regret it," she said. "I'm going to make your life a living hell." "Wait," I said. "I might be able to get some of the money. And I might be able to convince my daughter to give you the land. But I need time. I need a few days to arrange everything." "I'll give you 3 days," she said. "But if you try to trick me, I'm going to kill you and your family." She hung up the phone, leaving me trembling with fear. I knew that I had to act fast. I had 3 days to come up with a plan to outsmart Sarah Blackwood and save my family. I started by contacting Carol and David. I told them everything that had happened, about the threats, the letters, and the phone calls. They were both shocked and angry. "We're going to the police," David said. "We can't let this woman terrorize you." "No," I said. "We can't involve the police. Sarah Blackwood is too dangerous. She'll kill us all if we go to the police." "But what else can we do?" Carol asked. "We can't just give her what she wants." "I have a plan," I said, "but it's risky. It requires us to trust each other completely." I explained my plan to Carol and David. It involved luring Sarah Blackwood to a remote location, where we would ambush her and take her into custody. We would then turn her over to the authorities, and she would face justice for her crimes. Carol and David were hesitant at first, but they eventually agreed to my plan. They knew that it was our only hope. We spent the next 2 days preparing for the ambush. We gathered the necessary supplies, including weapons, handcuffs, and communication devices. We also scouted out the location, a deserted cabin in the woods that I knew well. It was a place where we could control the environment and minimize the risk of escape. On the 3rd day, I contacted Sarah Blackwood and told her that I was ready to meet her. I gave her the location of the cabin and told her to come alone. She agreed, and we set a time for the meeting. As the appointed time approached, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. I knew that this was it. The moment of truth had arrived. We were about to face Sarah Blackwood, and our lives would never be the same. But what I didn't know was that Sarah Blackwood had a few surprises of her own. She wasn't coming alone, and she had a plan that was far more sinister than anything I could have imagined. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the deserted landscape, Carol, David, and I arrived at the remote cabin. The air was thick with anticipation, and a nervous energy crackled between us. We double-checked our weapons and communication devices, ensuring that everything was in working order. We positioned ourselves strategically around the cabin, ready to spring our trap. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I knew that this was a dangerous game, but I was determined to protect my family. We waited in silence, listening for any sign of Sarah Blackwood's arrival. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, we heard the sound of a car approaching in the distance. The headlights pierced through the darkness, growing brighter as the car drew closer. We tensed, preparing for the confrontation. The car pulled up to the cabin and a figure emerged from the driver's seat. It was Sarah Blackwood, but she wasn't alone. Two men got out of the car with her. They were burly and intimidating, with menacing looks on their faces. My heart sank. Sarah Blackwood had betrayed us. She had brought reinforcements, and our plan was about to fall apart. We had no choice but to improvise. I quickly radioed Carol and David, warning them about the additional men. We agreed to stick to the plan as much as possible, but we also knew that we had to be prepared for anything. Sarah Blackwood and her companions approached the cabin cautiously. They scanned the surroundings, looking for any sign of trouble. I stepped out of the shadows, revealing myself to them. "Sarah," I said, trying to sound confident, "I see you brought some friends." Sarah Blackwood smirked. "I don't trust you, Alina," she said. "I wanted to make sure you didn't try anything funny." "I'm not going to try anything," I said. "I just want to get this over with." "Good," she said. "Then let's get down to business. Do you have the deed to the land and the money?" "I have the money," I said. "But my daughter is still considering giving you the land. She needs more time to think about it." Sarah Blackwood frowned. "I don't have time," she said. "I want the land now or else." "Or else what?" I asked. "Or else I'm going to kill you," she said. She pulled out a gun and pointed it at me. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. I was about to die, but I wasn't going to go down without a fight. Just as Sarah Blackwood was about to pull the trigger, Carol and David emerged from the shadows, guns drawn. "Drop the weapons, Sarah," David said, his voice firm. "It's over." Sarah Blackwood's eyes widened in surprise. She had been caught off guard, but she wasn't about to surrender. She turned her gun towards David and fired. The bullet whizzed past his head, narrowly missing him. David returned fire, hitting one of Sarah Blackwood's companions in the leg. The man screamed and fell to the ground. A firefight erupted. Bullets flew in all directions, shattering windows and splintering wood. I ducked for cover, trying to avoid getting hit. Carol engaged the other man, exchanging shots with him. He was a skilled fighter, but Carol was even better. She managed to disarm him and knock him to the ground. As the firefight raged, Sarah Blackwood made a run for it. She sprinted towards her car, hoping to escape. But I wasn't about to let her get away. I ran after her, determined to stop her. I caught up to her just as she was about to get into the car. I grabbed her arm and pulled her back. She turned around, her eyes filled with rage. "You're not going anywhere," I said, my voice trembling. "This is over." She tried to break free, but I held on tight. We struggled for a moment, wrestling each other to the ground. I managed to disarm her, kicking the gun away. I straddled her, pinning her to the ground. "It's over, Sarah," I said. "You've lost." Sarah Blackwood glared at me, her face contorted with hatred. "I'll never give up," she said. "I'll get my revenge, even if it's the last thing I do." "It's time to let go of the past," I said. "It's time to move on." I held her down until Carol and David arrived. They helped me restrain her and secure her in handcuffs. We had won. We had defeated Sarah Blackwood and her henchmen. But as I looked at Sarah Blackwood's face, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. She had been consumed by anger and resentment, and it had destroyed her life. I hoped that she would find peace someday, but I knew that it would be a long and difficult journey. We turned Sarah Blackwood and her companions over to the authorities. They were charged with numerous crimes, including attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy. They would face justice for their actions. As for me, I was finally free. I had escaped the cycle of revenge, and I could finally move on with my life. But the events of the past few months had changed me forever. I would never forget the fear, the violence, and the hatred that I had experienced. But I would also remember the courage, the resilience, and the love that had helped me survive. And I would always be grateful for the support of my family and friends who had stood by me through it all. As I looked towards the future, I knew that there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew that I was strong enough to face them. I had learned the true meaning of forgiveness, and I was determined to live my life with compassion, grace, and love. What I didn't know was how much I would soon need that forgiveness. The aftermath of the confrontation with Sarah Blackwood brought a sense of relief, but it was short-lived. The trial was a media circus, dredging up all the details of my past and exposing my mistakes to the world. Carol and David stood by me, but the strain was evident. The community was divided, some praising my courage, others condemning my actions. I tried to ignore the noise, focusing on healing and moving forward. But the past has a way of resurfacing, often when you least expect it. One evening, I received an unexpected visitor. It was a young woman, her face etched with sadness and anger. She introduced herself as Emily Blackwood, Sarah's daughter. My heart sank. What could this mean? "I know what happened," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I know about the threats, the ambush, everything." I braced myself, preparing for another confrontation. "I'm sorry for what my mother did," Emily continued. "She was wrong to try to hurt you, but I also understand why she did it. She was consumed by grief and anger, and she didn't know how to cope." I nodded, acknowledging her pain. "I understand," I said, "but her actions were unacceptable. She put my family in danger." "I know," Emily said, "and I'm not here to defend her. I'm here to ask for your forgiveness." I was taken aback. "My forgiveness?" I asked. "Why?" "Because I want to move on," Emily said. "I want to break the cycle of hatred and revenge that has plagued my family for so long. I want to create a better future for myself and my children." Her words resonated with me. I had been in her shoes, consumed by anger and seeking revenge. I knew how destructive it could be. "It's not easy," I said. "Letting go of the past takes courage and strength." "I know," Emily said, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to heal and move forward." I looked into her eyes, seeing a glimmer of hope amidst the pain. I knew that forgiving her wouldn't erase the past, but it would be a step towards a better future. "I forgive you, Emily," I said. "I forgive your mother, too." Tears streamed down Emily's face. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you so much." We talked for hours that night, sharing our stories and finding common ground. I learned that Emily had been estranged from her mother for many years, disapproving of her vengeful behavior. She had tried to persuade her to let go of the past, but Sarah had refused to listen. Emily was now raising her two young children alone, struggling to make ends meet. She wanted to create a stable and loving environment for them, free from the darkness of the past. I was moved by her determination, and I offered to help her in any way I could. I helped her find a job, and I provided her with financial assistance. I even babysat her children, giving her a chance to rest and recharge. As time went by, Emily became like a daughter to me. She was a kind, compassionate, and intelligent woman, and I admired her strength and resilience. I watched with pride as she built a new life for herself and her children, free from the burden of her family's past. But even as I celebrated Emily's success, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. I realized that I needed to confront my own past to make peace with the mistakes I had made. I decided to visit Sarah Blackwood in prison. The drive to the correctional facility was long and filled with trepidation. I didn't know what to expect or how Sarah would react to seeing me. I rehearsed what I wanted to say, but the words felt hollow and inadequate. When I arrived, I was subjected to a thorough security check before being led to a small, sterile visiting room. A thick glass partition separated me from Sarah, and we communicated through telephones. As Sarah was led into the room, I was struck by her appearance. She looked gaunt and worn, her eyes lacking the fire they once held. "Eleanor," she said, her voice raspy, "what are you doing here?" "I came to see you," I said. "I wanted to talk." Sarah scoffed. "What is there to talk about? You won, I lost." End of story. "It's not that simple," I said. "We both lost, we both made mistakes, and we both need to find a way to move on." "Move on," she said. "How can I move on? My life is over. I'm in prison. My daughter hates me." "Emily doesn't hate you," I said. "She forgives you. She wants you to be a part of her life." Sarah's eyes welled up with tears. "She does?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "but you have to be willing to change. You have to let go of the anger and resentment that have consumed you for so long." "I don't know if I can," she said. "It's been a part of me for so long." "I know it's not easy," I said, But you have to try, for Emily's sake, for your own sake. We talked for hours, sharing our feelings and our regrets. I told her about my own journey of healing and forgiveness, and I encouraged her to seek therapy and counseling. I also told her about Emily's progress, her new life, and her children. As we talked, I saw a glimmer of hope in Sarah's eyes. She began to realize that she didn't have to be defined by her past, that she could create a better future for herself. "I'll try," she said finally. "I'll try to change, but it's going to be hard." "I know," I said, "but I'll be here for you. I'll support you every step of the way." I visited Sarah regularly in prison, providing her with emotional support and encouragement. I also helped her connect with Emily, who eventually agreed to visit her mother. The reunion was emotional, filled with tears and apologies, but it was also a sign of hope, a symbol of the possibility of healing and reconciliation. As time went by, Sarah made remarkable progress. She participated in therapy, she took responsibility for her actions, and she began to rebuild her relationship with Emily. She was still in prison, but she was no longer consumed by anger and resentment. She had found peace, and she was determined to make the most of her second chance. My journey of revenge had taken me down a dark and destructive path, but it had also led me to a place of forgiveness, healing, and love. I had learned that revenge is never the answer, and that true satisfaction comes from helping others and making the world a better place. And I had discovered that even the most broken relationships can be repaired with enough effort, compassion, and understanding. As I looked towards the future, I knew that there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew that I was strong enough to face them. I had learned from my mistakes, and I was determined to live my life with purpose, gratitude, and love. Years passed, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Thomas grew into a fine young man, excelling in school and sports. Carol and David thrived, building a successful business and raising a beautiful family. Emily blossomed, becoming a respected member of the community and a loving mother to her children. And Sarah, after serving her time, was released from prison and reunited with her family. She found a job, she reconnected with her friends, and she became a positive influence in her grandchildren's lives. We all gathered at my house every year for Thanksgiving, celebrating our blessings and giving thanks for the love and forgiveness that had brought us together. As I sat at the head of the table, surrounded by my family and friends, I felt a sense of peace and contentment wash over me. I had made mistakes in my life, but I had also learned from them. I had forgiven those who had wronged me, and I had been forgiven in return. I had found happiness and fulfillment in my relationships, and I was grateful for every moment. But even as I basked in the warmth of family and friendship, a nagging thought lingered in the back of my mind. Had I truly escaped the cycle of revenge, or would it come back to haunt me in unexpected ways? One day I received a letter. It was postmarked from a foreign country, and the return address was unfamiliar. Curiosity piqued, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The words were typed, not handwritten, and they were chillingly familiar. "Eleanor, you think you've gotten away with it. You think you've broken the cycle. But you're wrong. Revenge is a dish best served cold." And I'm just getting started. My heart pounded in my chest. Who had sent this letter? And what did they mean by just getting started? A wave of fear washed over me, threatening to undo all the progress I had made. Was I destined to live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next act of revenge? Or could I finally break free from the darkness and embrace the light? Only time would tell. As I stared at the letter, a sense of determination washed over me. I wouldn't let fear consume me. I wouldn't let the past define me. I would face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage, resilience, and love. The cycle of revenge might never truly end, but I could choose to rise above it. I could choose to focus on the present, on the people I loved, and on the good that I could do in the world. And that, I realized, was the only revenge worth taking. But from whom could this new threat come, and what would their first move be? I decided to keep the letter a secret, not wanting to alarm my family. I knew that if I told them about it, they would worry and want to take action. But I also knew that involving them would only put them in danger. This was my battle, and I had to fight it alone. I began to investigate the letter, searching for any clues that might reveal the sender's identity. I contacted a handwriting expert, hoping that they could analyze the typeface and trace it back to its source. I also reached out to some of my contacts in law enforcement, asking them to run a background check on the return address. But my efforts were fruitless. The handwriting expert couldn't identify the typeface, and the background check came back empty. The letter remained a complete mystery. As the days went by, I became increasingly paranoid. I started seeing threats everywhere I looked. A strange car parked outside my house, a shadowy figure lurking in the bushes, a phone call with no one on the other end. I knew that I was letting my imagination run wild, but I couldn't help it. The letter had awakened a deep-seated fear within me, a fear that I couldn't shake. One morning, I woke up to find my house ransacked. The doors were open, the windows were broken, and my belongings were scattered everywhere. I gasped in horror. This was it. The revenge had begun. I ran through the house, checking to see if anything was missing. To my surprise, nothing seemed to have been stolen. The intruders had simply vandalized the place, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. As I surveyed the damage, I noticed something strange. A single word had been spray-painted on the wall. Remember. Remember what? I wondered. What was I supposed to remember? I racked my brain, trying to recall any events from my past that might be relevant, but nothing came to mind. The word remember seemed to be a cryptic message, a puzzle that I couldn't solve. I called the police and they came to investigate. They took fingerprints, collected evidence, and interviewed me about what had happened. But they didn't have any leads, and they couldn't offer me any reassurance. They told me to be careful and to call them if I saw anything suspicious. But I knew that I was on my own. The police couldn't protect me from someone who was determined to get revenge. I had to figure out who was behind these attacks, and I had to stop them before they did something even worse. But how could I possibly solve a mystery that was shrouded in so much secrecy and deceit? As I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of my home, I realized that I had to change my strategy. I couldn't wait for the enemy to strike. I had to take the offensive. I had to dig into my past, uncover the secrets that I had buried, and confront the demons that haunted me. It was a dangerous path, but it was the only way to protect myself and my family. But what secrets would I uncover, and what price would I have to pay for the truth? I decided to start by revisiting some of the key events from my past, the events that had shaped my life and led me to this point. I went back to my childhood home in Maine, hoping that it would trigger some memories. I walked through the rooms, touching the walls and breathing in the familiar scent of wood and dust. I remembered playing in the yard, laughing with my siblings, and listening to my parents read stories. But I didn't find any clues, any revelations that could help me solve the mystery. Frustrated, I decided to visit my husband Tom's grave. I stood before the headstone, gazing at his name and his dates of birth and death. I remembered our wedding day, our honeymoon, and the years we had spent together. I also remembered the difficult times, the arguments, the betrayals, and the secrets that we had kept from each other. As I stood there, a memory surfaced. It was a memory of a conversation that Tom and I had had many years ago, a conversation about a business deal that had gone wrong. Tom had been involved in a partnership with another man, a man named Richard Harding. They had planned to develop a large piece of land, but the deal had fallen apart due to a disagreement over finances.